Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're digging into a whole stack of sources, all focused on California. We're looking at the political lines being drawn and, well, the cultural foundations that really hold things together there.
Yeah, we've got some stories that seem pretty different on the surface. A big fight over redistricting, a South LA food institution facing a crisis, and then these lasting legacies of music and activism.
Exactly. So our mission here is to figure out how these political maps, the lines drawn by politicians, how they clash with, or maybe even get reinforced by the, let's call them cultural maps,
Yeah.
community, history, that kind of resilience.
We're hunting for those nuggets that explain what's really going on.
Okay.
And what jumps out right away from these sources is this tension between different scales.
Uh-huh.
You have these massive systemic things happening, federal shutdowns, redrawing congressional maps,
Huge.
huge. And it slams right up against the hyper-local stuff, the day-to-day life. The real question becomes, which lines actually matter more in the long run? The political ones or the cultural ones?
That's a great way to frame it. Okay, let's tackle that huge political fight first then. Proposition 50.
Mm-hmm.
This is Assembly Bill 604. And the people pushing it, Governor Newsom included, they're calling it the Election Rigging Response Act.
Right.
The idea seems to be, look, we need to push back against what's happening with partisan gerrymandering in states like, well, Texas is the big example they use.
That's the spin, yeah. But the opposition they've organized as the Protect Voters First Coalition, they see it very differently.
Okay, how so?
Their argument is basically this whole thing is engineered to give California Democrats a leg up in the upcoming U.S. House midterms.
Ah,
And what really worries them, fundamentally, is that Prop 50 could basically dismantle the nonpartisan redistricting system California built up over, the last decade or so.
which was a huge reform effort at the time.
Exactly. A
Yeah.
big deal. And these worries aren't just abstract political strategy. The core issue that keeps coming up is diluting local voting power.
And we've got a really potent example of that from Stockton, right? Bishop Dwight Earl Williams.
Yeah, from New Genesis Outreach. He sounds, frankly, really distressed about what these map changes could mean for his community.
What specifically is the issue there?
Well, right now, San Joaquin County, where Stockton is, it sits within 2 congressional districts.
Okay, too.
Under this Prop 50 proposal, that number could jump to 5. 5 different districts carving up the county.
5 for one county.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Bishop Williams, he told the story about how his community managed to get 95% consensus across all sorts of different groups for a really important development project.
That's impressive consensus.
It is. And he basically said splitting us 5 ways would just, quote, completely destroy that work.
I can see why he'd say that. If you split a city like Stockton, over 350,000 people, into 5 pieces,
Right.
what happens to their collective voice, their leverage?
It gets fragmented,
Yeah.
totally diluted. Imagine trying to get 5 different members of Congress, maybe with very different priorities, to agree on what's best for Stockton. It makes effective local lobbying incredibly difficult.
Yeah, that sounds like a nightmare. Now, you mentioned a GIS expert, Fabian Valdez Jr. His analysis gets into the specifics, especially for minority communities.
Yes, Valdez looked at the CVAP data, that's citizen voting age population, and what he found is pretty stark.
Like what?
Well, the proposed map splits major Black populations. For example, folks in South Sacramento. They'd get shifted into a new district that stretches way out east, 101 miles, all the way to Truckee.
Truckee, that's a predominantly white mountain town, right? Very different area.
Wildly different. Geographically, socioeconomically, you're mashing these completely distinct areas into one voting block. It feels like the opposite of keeping communities of interest together.
Which is supposed to be a key principle of the Independent Commission, wasn't it?
Absolutely. And it's not just Sacramento. Down south, the analysis shows Black communities in places like Long Beach, Downey, Bellflower, they get carved up and pushed into new districts that reach deep into Orange County. Now, some areas like Compton, Inglewood, Carson, they stay in Representative Maxine Waters' district, but the overall regional voice for Black voters gets fractured.
And up north.
Similar story in the East Bay. You've got these cities with significant Black populations, Richmond, Vallejo, Antioch, Bay Point, Pittsburgh. Right now, they're largely in one district.
Mm-hmm.
The Prop 50 map slices them into 3 different districts.
3. Okay. It's interesting that some of the strongest pushback is coming from people who were involved in setting up the original nonpartisan system,
Yeah.
Jean Rea.
Yeah, she chaired the first Citizens Redistricting Commission. She's very active in the No campaign.
What's her main warning?
She's basically saying the Yes campaign is being misleading. They're framing it as this temporary fix for, national problems, fighting Trumpism or whatever.
Right.
But she argues if you let politicians grab this power back, even for 5 years, by the time the 2030 census rolls around, the public might forget why the independent commission was so important in the first place.
So the memory fades and the reform gets undone.
That's the fear. She flat out called it an incumbent protection plan.
The rhetoric is definitely heated. Valdez, the GIS expert, he noted that the yes side tends to focus on fighting the Trump administration, fighting gerrymandering elsewhere.
Rather than actually defending the specific lines on this map.
Right. But there is a counter-argument, isn't there? The California Legislative Black Caucus.
There is. The CLBC came out publicly in support of Prop 50.
And their reasoning.
They framed it as an act of solidarity, essentially, pointing to legislators in Texas who are fighting really aggressive partisan maps there. So it's this tough political choice, right? Would you try to fight what you see as a national injustice, even if it means compromising the system you built at home?
A difficult calculation, for sure.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's the redistricting battle, all about lines and division. Let's pivot now. Let's talk about forces that unite, about community resilience.
That's a good idea.
And Doolin's Soul Food Kitchen in South LA is a perfect example. It's this historic spot, a real cornerstone. But apparently, a big renovation almost bankrupted them.
Yeah, it's quite a story. Gregory Doolin, the owner, poured everything into this major renovation, and then boom, financial crisis hits right after. But this is where the community steps in, literally. His fraternity brothers organized fundraisers, church groups mobilized, neighbors, longtime customers just started showing up, basically telling him, you can't close, you're part of LA history.
Wow. That's powerful. It really drives home that infrastructure isn't just concrete and steel, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes it's a soul food place that holds a neighborhood together.
Absolutely. And Doolin's has deep roots. Gregory's parents, Adolph and Mary, they opened their first restaurant back in 1975.
Okay.
Gregory opened this location on Crenshaw in 1992. Think about that timing right after the Rodney King uprising.
So it's been an anchor through some really tough times for the city.
A living piece of history.
Yeah.
But they're not just resting on that history. They're innovating, too.
How so? What are they doing?
Well, the renovation itself was partly about modernizing, adding things like a big community patio. They knew they were serving an area that often gets called a food desert, so they wanted to create a better space.
Fun.
And their business strategy is looking forward, too. They expanded their heat and serve meal line into grocery stores like Vallarta Supermarket.
Okay. Reaching more people that way.
Yeah. And maybe the most interesting thing, they struck a deal with DoorDash's DashMart.
DashMart. Those are like DoorDash's little convenience hubs.
Exactly. So Doolin's can get their food out to completely new neighborhoods, they mentioned Torrance, downtown LA, without the massive cost of opening whole new restaurants. It's a clever way to tackle that food access issue.
That focus on community, on feeding people, it connects directly to another source.
Yeah.
We looked at the federal government shutdown that started October 1st.
Right. Big worries, especially in California, about nutrition programs getting cut off.
Particularly at WIC, right? The program for women, infants, and children.
Yes, WIC is crucial. But here's the interesting part. California actually managed to keep it running, at least for a while.
How? If the federal funding stopped.
Well, the California Department of Public Health announced WIC would keep operating using existing funds they had on hand. The key is sort of how WIC is funded.
Okay, explain that.
It serves a massive number of people, almost 1 million low to moderate income residents every month in California.
Wow.
The funding does come from a USDA grant, which is discretionary, meaning Congress has to approve it each year. But a huge chunk of WIC's operational costs are covered by rebates from infant formula manufacturers.
I see. So it's not solely dependent on that direct congressional appropriation.
Exactly. It doesn't rely on the state general fund either. That unique mix, the grant plus the rebates, gave California a cushion. It allowed them to bridge the gap, keep the food and the services flowing. We're talking big money, too, like $1.4 billion estimated just for food in the next budget cycle.
That's a significant buffer. Still, even with WIC stabilized temporarily, the political noise around the shutdown itself was intense.
Oh, yeah. Very polarized, echoing that national divide we saw with the Prop 50 debate.
What were the main arguments?
You had the Congressional Black Caucus pointing fingers directly at Republicans and former President Trump, calling the lapse in funding the most aggressive attack on healthcare in modern history.
Strong words.
Definitely. On the other side, you had House Speaker Mike Johnson arguing that Democrats weren't cooperating on the budget, and he highlighted the The irony that vital folks like military troops and Border Patrol were working without pay.
While this fight held up funding for programs like WIC, even if it turned out okay for a bit.
Right, both sides blaming the other for the political brinkmanship impacting essential services.
Okay, so we've seen political division, community safety nets under pressure.
Hmm.
Let's shift again to legacies that seem to rise above the day-to-day fray. Enduring legacies.
Good transition.
Let's start with music royalty. The Isley Brothers. They played the Kern County Fair in Bakersfield recently. And the sources emphasized the crowd.
All ages, right? Totally. Grandparents, parents, grandkids, everyone there. And when you hear the songs they played, Who's That Lady? It's Your Thing, Between the Sheets, obviously, Shout.
Classics. Absolute classic.
It's like the soundtrack to Black family life for, 60 years now? Ronald Isley, still going strong at 84. It's incredible longevity.
It really is. But it's not just that they lasted. It's their influence. What do you see as their biggest impact on music that came after them?
Oh, it's huge. I mean, think about how they blended that deep gospel feeling with secular themes, with funk, with rock. That fusion, it basically laid the groundwork for modern soul music.
You could hear it.
You can trace a direct line to the sort of the sensual depth in Marvin Gaye's music. Their funk rock experiments, Prince picked that up and ran with it.
Right.
And then there's hip hop. Their catalog is just foundational. Biggie sampling Between the Sheets for Big Papa.
Iconic sample.
Totally. Or Kendrick Lamar sampling That Lady for his track I. And Ron Isley even appears on Kendrick's track.
Full circle.
Exactly. They're not just musicians, they're cultural architects. Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, Grammy Lifetime Achievement. They've earned all of it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Now, let's turn to another legacy, one that's maybe more complex, more controversial for some. Assata Shakur.
Born Joan Byron.
Journalist Thandiswi Chimurenga wrote a reflection on her life and her recent passing.
Yeah, her story is just, it's so tied up in the intensity of the 20th century Black liberation struggle. Member of the Black Panther Party, the Black Liberation Army.
And heavily targeted by the SBI, right?
COINTELPRO.
Heavily. COINTELPRO was explicitly designed to disrupt and neutralize groups like the Panthers. Shakur was convicted in '77 for her alleged role in a shootout, then staged that famous escape in '79.
And ended up in Cuba.
Right. Granted political asylum. And she lived there for decades until she passed away.
Chimurenga's piece mentioned this sort of bittersweet feeling about her exile. Yeah, sadness at never getting that interview, never hearing her story directly in later years, but also just immense relief and maybe even joy that she remained free outside the reach of the U.S. system for almost 50 years.
And her words, her ideas, they certainly lived on outside of Cuba.
Oh, absolutely. That famous quote, "It is our duty to fight for our freedom. We have nothing to lose but our chains."
Became a chant.
Became a chant in Ferguson, a key touchstone for the Black Lives Matter movement. Chimurenga called her a warrior queen mother and highlighted her call for activists to be weapons of mass construction, building things, not just tearing down.
So let's step back and try to synthesize all this. We've got this giant political machine drawing lines on a map, trying to gain advantage. And then we have these deep-rooted, hyper-local cultural anchors, a restaurant, a band, the memory of an activist fighting to survive, to inspire. What's the big takeaway from this deep dive?
Well, I think the sources really highlight this contrast. The state is grappling with these huge systemic shocks, threats to the way districts are drawn, uncertainty over federal funding.
Right.
But the most powerful signs of real resilience, they seem to be incredibly local and cultural. Doolin's makes it because the community literally shows up. The Isley Brothers bring generations together because that music hits something deeper than politics.
And the words of someone like Assata Shakur continue to motivate people.
Exactly. That power of historic resistance, it shapes identity, it shapes action, almost regardless of who's in charge in Sacramento or D.C. The cultural lines seem incredibly strong.
Okay, let's quickly recap those knowledge nuggets we found. First, Prop 50 isn't just an abstract threat. In places like San Joaquin County, it could mean going from 2 congressional districts to 5, potentially silencing local voices.
Right, a real potential fragmentation.
Second, WIC managed to weather the start of the federal shutdown because its funding stream is unique. It depends heavily on those USDA grants and manufacturer rebates, giving it a buffer.
A crucial detail in how that safety net functions.
And third, the Isley Brothers aren't just oldies. Their music is living history that directly shaped artists, from Marvin Gaye all the way to Kendrick Lamar.
Foundational influence, absolutely.
So wrapping this up, maybe a final thought for you, the listener, to chew on?
Yeah, here's something to consider. We see how volatile and, frankly, contentious these political debates about election laws and redistricting are becoming.
Definitely.
So the question is, how might those other forces, those powerful cultural legacies we talked about, the unity found in food and music, the strength drawn from historic resistance, how might those ultimately shape things like voter turnout or genuine community consensus heading into future elections like 2026? Could they end up being more decisive than however those political lines eventually get drawn?